Again, I don't know how many people are going to be in on this one. Let's see. Maybe nobody will show up. It'll be interesting. At least it'll be on the page, I guess, right? He's always here. Hey everybody, so today we're drawing bubbles. I like the kind of colorful ones, so this is what I kind of did just to start out. For those of you who have your paintbrushes and paints with you, I did liquid paints before in the tubes, so today I figured I'd kind of work with these ones. They look a little messy because I use them for classes and lots of kids use them, so you'll see there's kind of mixed in colors, which is fine, but you can wash them out pretty easy and you can kind of get back to that regular color. Just like with tube paints, you can see too, this will dry and then you can use it again and again until the paint is pretty much gone. So I like these. You can get them in really good quality. These ones are just student grade, which is fine. To play around with things like bubbles and to practice, student grade is the best thing you can get without kind of wasting a lot of money. So I'm going to get started. I did mention that in our page we need pencils. You don't have to if you feel comfortable enough kind of drawing your circle with the paint, but I'm going to start with a pencil so everybody can kind of go along with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw a big circle. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what I'm going to do is make it as round as I possibly can. And to do that, I kind of do a really big backwards C, and then I kind of just add another C on the other side of it. That's my easiest way to kind of describe how to draw a circle. That's, you know, fairly round, good enough to work with bubbles. And if you feel like there's something wrong with it, you can always erase a little bit and go back. But I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more bubbles around on my page. So again, the backwards C, and then the forward C. And again, I kind of messed up there, so I'm going to fix that. And so far we've got 2 little bubbles. Let's add another one right about here. And I'm just going to create them at multiple different sizes so that you guys can kind of play around with how you work with them. You don't have to have them not touching in any way. I mean, you can go ahead and put one behind if you feel like you want that to happen. Actually, I kind of like that. I'm going to leave this one out. I like that better. So that's what I'm going to do to start. So if you guys want to do that, that's pretty simple to keep going that way. You can do as many as you want. I'm going to do maybe 4. The more you do, the quicker you're going to be able to switch into other spots because you're waiting for things to dry through this tutorial. So having more bubbles is going to be way easier than not having enough to kind of bide your time, I guess. Hi, everybody. So yeah. So I'm going to start with that and then maybe another little guy down. Ooh, my pencil broke. Another little guy down here. Again, I am using this one for all of my practice paintings. It is the Canson brand. You can get it at Walmart. Most locations like that you can get them at, and they're about $9 or $10. So it's really great for practice. It's really great for kind of playing around and not spending a whole lot of money. It's the same with these. They don't cost a whole lot of money. Sometimes they're about, you know, $6 to $20, depending on what your quality grade is. Or they can go way more expensive depending on the brands and again, quality. So we're going to go with that. Again, you can see they've used or been used a lot of times, and it's lasted me quite a while. Unless you're painting like excessively with watercolors, it'll last you quite a bit. So that's the other thing when you're looking at price, you can kind of just think about how long it's going to last you, and kind of makes me feel a little bit better. But yeah, so these are ones I did before. Like I said, I kind of like the dark kind of almost gaseous looking ones. Like if you look at oil stains or oil bubbles or things like that, that's what those kind of remind me of. And I kind of like those. And for these ones, I'm just using a small little round brush because I like this one and it lets me do small amounts of detail. You can do a background first and then darken as you go. And that's another thing we've got to look at is we're going to build our color. With acrylics, if you've used them, you notice that you go from dark to black a lot of the time because you can build on top of color. And watercolor's a little less forgiving with that, and so we start with light to dark. So the darkest points of your watercolor are going to be the last bits you put on. You do get white in a lot of your paint palettes and your tubes, and I mean when your watercolor dries, you can kind of flick it on, or you can add little light spaces in certain spots, and you can even use it to put over top and kind of just mix a little better with certain areas. But it's not often used as something that can go on top of other paints very well because it is watercolor and it's a lot of, more transparent than anything like acrylic and things like that. So I'm going to get started with this. This is the color I'm going to use, this lighter blue. This darker blue I'll use later, but this lighter blue is kind of what I'm going to go for. So if you guys have this type of color or color similar to it, it's probably the best one to start with. Because every time I look at bubbles, they're either blue or any, some form of like greeny blue, things like that. So I'm going to start here. So if you guys have done your drawings in your circles, we're going to take some of this blue here. And remember to kind of put your brush in the water quite often because you don't want a lot of paint. We're going to try and spread it more than actually get a lot of color on there. And this is where we're going to look at negative space too. So I know this is a lot, but we'll get through it together. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to just really gently kind of start flicking things apparently, pushing around color. You'll notice there's not much on my brush at all because I'm just trying to figure out where I want this stuff to go. So you'll see there how it's starting to come in. I'm not touching any of the sides quite yet because I'm just trying to work in those blue tones as we go. If you look at my palette here, I'm going to put it under here actually, you'll see the puddle of water underneath that or on top of the blue. That's what you want because then that way you can just keep dipping it in and then dip it in a tiny bit of water and keep working. So you'll notice too, it spreads when it goes onto the water you've already put down because it's not dry yet. I'm going to just not touch the edges, but kind of get close and move around your bubble. The thing about bubbles is you don't ever want to put straight lines in this space here because a straight line is going to make it look, it's going to like kind of kill the illusion of it being 3D around. And so every kind of movement, lots of paint, any kind of movement or shape you make with bubbles is also gonna be round most of the time, or at least curved. If you've ever had to draw like like the bouncy balls and things when you're sketching, it's kind of the same sort of principle. All your shading kind of goes around because this point will be like your closest point to you. So I'm going to work that way. I'm going to pretend my light source is kind of from up here. And you can see again, there's a line around here where we're not really touching the edge. And that's kind of what we're going to start with and not mess with that too much. So once I've got that with that bubble, I'm going to go ahead with all my other bubbles until that other bubble dries. Kind of do the same thing. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, obviously, because bubbles kind of move color everywhere. But we'll move it this way. I will pull color from this one a little differently. And just remember, we're leaving lots of space and white areas on our bubbles because what's going to happen after that is we're going to use that to create your light sources instead of trying to build that on top. Again, if you're painting with acrylic or oils, it's completely different and it can get very confusing if you're trying to switch to things like watercolor. But I'm going to use this water to my advantage, kind of pull it across and add those shapes and spots. The best thing about watercolor with this is that it likes to move on its own, right? So the coolest thing is it's going to pretty much do that, that kind of bloom in where bubbles go on its own mostly, if you've got enough water going on there. If you have too much water, remember you can always kind of drag it out in your brush. Like if you haven't seen my last session, the very beginner one, you can dry off your brush and then kind of just wipe it on a napkin a little bit and it will suck up excess water all of the time. So that's an option if you've kind of got a little too much water going on there. So I'm gonna move this bubble. I'm going to darken my colors a little bit as I go to smaller bubbles because they are smaller and you're not going to be able to see them as well if you have too much paint on there. So something like that maybe. And you can see as we're going, this is already a pretty decent start. We've already got the kind of idea of what we're trying to do here. And then I'm going to work with this one. I'm going to be very careful in this one about how I put the color in because it is behind this bubble. If you feel confident enough, I'm going to leave it like this for today. But if you feel confident enough, you can always draw the circle in here and kind of show that the bubble's behind it. But I'm going to just leave it like that today because I'm I'm not really that confident today about that, so, which is fine. I mean, some days when you paint, it might not work out for you. Other days you can move along swimmingly and nothing's wrong, right? So, like I said before, if I'm moving too fast, just send me a message on the comments and I will slow down or explain anything if you have other questions. But I'm going to keep going with this. And I keep flicking things on here. Alright, so this one, again, curved shapes, curved angles, anything like that. We're not going with any sort of straight lines. And if you have enough water, like I said, it'll move and help you along without too much effort. So remember, we're not touching any of the edges of our bubbles. The top of the bubbles will have more space on the white part, and the bottom of the bubbles, just for this one example, will have more color and less space towards the side of your bubble than the rest. So if you're seeing that there's not a lot of color at the bottom in some spots, you can go ahead and kind of just push a little more color in those. All right. Okay, I kind of think this one doesn't have enough color. And just push it around. If you're using a bigger brush, that's fine. All you just gotta do is make sure that your usage of color and water is equal to the size of your brush. You can see I'm kind of going around and darkening certain spots. I'm not darkening every single part of this kind of shadowy blue we've put in there. I'm still using the same color, and you can see why is because it darkens it for itself when you start putting things into it. You can even make little dark spots if you think that maybe that'll be part of your bubble, like that. And because my water was all over that, it did it all on its own. And I kind of like how that's looking, so I am going to do it on all my bubbles. Right? And you can see it's kind of just pushing its way around there. Right? I kind of dab things with my finger a little bit if I kind of want to just move it around, give myself a little bit of a little more messed up kind of look, or add a little more spots. And I always think the control for bubbles and things like this comes from the layers. Because the first layer is going to be kind of just larger and bigger than everything else, and you kind of squish in or bring in the detail, right? So that's kind of my favorite part. It's like watching a movie almost for me, I think, because it's, you know, or a puzzle anyway. I think I've mentioned that before, where it just kind of feels like everything starts to come together in certain parts at the end. So yeah, I like how that's looking so far. Okay, so that was the blue we used. Remember, if anybody's come in a little later, that light blue here is what we just used. And you can see there's lots of kind of puddles in the paint for there, so I can keep using that. It'll stay wet for a fairly long time. And if it doesn't, you know, I've got my little Volkswagen mug. Oh, you can't really see it. Well, there. This is my paint mug, if anybody wanted to know. And I don't know if it's weird, but I have a favorite paint mug, and this is the one. As I drop things. So yeah. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking at this darker blue we've got here. There's not going to be much that I'm putting in with this just yet, but I'm kind of just adding in the color for it. I'm going in with my water and just adding lots onto the palette. A lot of people will like the little pucks for painting because you're not kind of stuck or having to clean out those wells on a palette. When you have a bunch of tube paints, these can come in many styles and number of paints or anything. So if you're more of a person that likes the tube paints and you like to kind of mix and match your palettes, it's a good example. The same thing as you can make your own dry palette with the tube paints and then just continue using that. And that's what I kind of tend to do because the quality of tube paints that I have are just the gorgeous paints. And sometimes I don't want to, I have huge palettes that have, 30 colors on it, and that's what I kind of tend to use, and then a big mixing thing in the middle. These ones don't really have a mixing thing in the middle, so you do have to rely either on a palette if you choose again, or mixing it on the page. Sometimes I mix it on my hands, but that's because I can be lazy. Yeah, so I'm gonna just kind of really gently push this dark blue in here in very small spaces, so closer to the edge most likely. And just very gently pushing that in there. And spraying paint everywhere also. So you can see, because this is still a little bit wet, it's helping it mush into your other color a little nicer. And it's creating that dynamic in the bubble where there's that kind of ebb and flow of different colors. Already we're kind of getting into a good spot. I'm going to move it down here a little bit. And so one choice you'll have to make when you get to closer to the end is if you want this pencil line around there or not, or if you want to erase little parts of it, or if you want to go around it with a really thin brush and outline certain spaces of it with a darker color. So there's a few choices there. But I do like the look of pencil with watercolors. There's a lot of really cool things you can do. Other things that you can do is if you like these and you have like pens or felts, you can even draw on top of them when they're dry. I would not draw on top of them if they're still wet because you'll ruin your felts or pens. And I do know things like Prismacolor and things like that are very expensive sometimes for really high quality things. So just remember that if it's not dry, I would not use a pen. Yeah, and then I might just kind of push a little bit up this way to kind of create more of that round implication, if you will, into our bubble. So I'm going to kind of dab it a little bit and bring it down because you can kind of see where it's going now. It's pushing it and bringing that roundness to our circle shape. If anybody has any questions, just type them right out there. And again, we can add those spots where we have darker bits if you want. But I'm going to go ahead into my other bubbles and start kind of pushing this color around there too. And you notice most of your other bubbles will be dry if you used, an adequate amount of water. If you use too much water, they might still be a little wet, or if you just kind of speeding through it a little faster than you need to, they might be a little bit wet, but it's okay with that because you do kind of want a little bit of color to move it around. But just be really careful about how much paint you've got on there then if you're kind of just going in while it's still kind of fresh. And here we go, get a little bit there. And my friend does stuff, sometimes I hear, and it makes me really happy, and I've started doing that when I'm drawing or painting. Randomly you'll hear, yeah. This one. I know last time we just got into like really basic things, but I'm really excited to kind of do this one and get into some actual objects and creatures maybe later. But the other thing that's cool is if you guys follow any of the drawing classes or go into those, you can always take those sketches and I can show you guys how to transfer those with transfer paper. And you can actually paint those onto watercolor paper too. So if you do the drawing classes, it's a great way to kind of find some inspiration for your painting. I do that all the time. So you can see that roundness starting to come out in a lot of the bubbles. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, but I believe in you guys. You can do it. Kind of seeing a little bit of a pattern here, and I kind of want to fix it. So I'm going to move a little color up here. Kind of get rid of that very vague sort of blocky look that happened there. There we go. So one thing is you can kind of stick with blues or other colors. Like I said, for me, I really like multicolor things. So like this bubble here, I'm going to go ahead and look at my other palette, which has reds and browns and yellows. I'm definitely going to use the yellow this time because I like how it looks and it kind of gives the idea of it changing color. So I'm going to kind of look at this and figure out where I want to put that. For me, I'm going to put some yellows maybe right here, just a little bit. I know for me, my yellow doesn't move a lot, so I can kind of push it in there pretty quietly. And you see how nice that change happened right here, where you've got this deep blue, this lighter blue, and then this tiny tinge of yellow coming in. And it's just mixing so well from the top to the bottom. And that's what I kind of want to see happening. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit down here to give it a little bit of consistency, if you will. And move it on up a tiny bit. Just like that. And so you can kind of see that that yellow is starting to really push its way into our painting, which I quite enjoy. And I'm going to do that with all the rest of my other bubbles. Like I said, we're trying to wait out that drying period. And they don't have to be in the same spot, so just kind of decide what makes it work for you. And I'm not going to worry too much about the smallest bubbles because you don't need much. And I mean, even if some of your bubbles mess up, I mean, there's some that I'm not quite happy with on mine. At least you got a couple to kind of play with. So that yellow's in there now. And you can see that sheen on here, which shows how wet it is. It's quite wet, right? This is all happened to kind of dimple if you poke it. So depending on what you want to do there, you can kind of work with it. Later on, I'm going to go around the sides here with a little bit of a lighter color, just so we can kind of push it back into the bubble. And I'm going to erase sections of this circle and just only leave enough to kind of imply the roundness of it. The color inside should be what's dictating how you're seeing the image, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. But yeah, so this is kind of where I'm going with it. Again, I like a lot of color, so I'm going to go in with some orange or some red. Again, all in one palette, and this is kind of what I like about these things. They do get kind of messy. I noticed with like kids classes, you'll see there's like that red and the white. I've got to clean this. But you can always easily fix that. It's just surface stuff. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead maybe with a little bit of this kind of these reds over, oh, no, wait, these reds over here. And I'm going to just push some more color in. I'm going to leave these red colors closer to the bottom because, again, that's going to imply where the bubble's bottom half is, and that there's shadows coming from under there. Or, you know, if they're floating over something that's, you know, green and spacious, you'll see greener tones. So it's also the same if you're looking at pets or other things like branches or leaves, or even, you know, lake water. If there's something that is, you know, like pink skies or things like that, you'll notice in the water that there's those pink tones in there in certain spots, and that's because there's reflection on certain colors. Even things like paintings like bears and things, reflections on what the color they have on them will also kind of move over into how you paint them and what colors you're working with. So let's go with some of this red here. And with the water, push some into that palette, just like we did with the other ones, so we don't have to work so hard to get those colors out. Alright, so I'm going to work lower, kind of play around with my options. I'm going to be very careful with the red because red can take over quite a lot, and I don't want it to just overwhelm my bubbles. So you see how small of a bit of red I put in there, and just kind of hooked it up with that yellow. So it kind of follows that transition from here, and we're going to add a little bit up here just to kind of follow along with that kind of arc. Gonna stop flicking paint. Alright, so you can see where those colors are sort of coming from and how nicely they kind of work together. I think they do. I mean, there's hundreds of different ways you can kind of do bubbles. This is kind of one of my favorite ways, and they kind of look just super fun when you're done with them. Again, you don't have to use the same colors that I'm using. You can kind of play around with it, pick and choose. Like, I mean, you can turn these into different things. Like, you could make balloons. It was suggested that these kind of can look like planets too. Like, you can make so many different things out of just this part. And if you feel really creative, like I said, pens or felts, you can actually really create a cool image. You can use watercolors as a background for so many other things that you want to do. If you stamp, or if you do paintings on top of watercolor, or inking, there's just so much. So this is a really good option to kind of decide what you're going to want to work with, right? So yeah, so I'm going to work a little bit more with those deeper colors, but I'm going to switch back over to this one because if you notice, we've got kind of a purple color right in here. And then you've got your blacks. I'm not really going to use black, but I'm going to kind of take advantage of this purple color and see what happens. Because again, if you water it down, it'll be lighter than it looks like on the palette. And so, I mean, if you're unsure of how much is on your, you know, brush, you can either use the palette, or you can use, you know, an extra piece of paper on the side and just see how much is coming off when you're painting it. It kind of gives you an idea on what you want to do. So I can see that it's not a whole bunch coming off, so I can go ahead and work with little darker tones, kind of create a little more of a line. And if you're looking again with negative space, you can kind of just work around certain spots that you want there to be lighter areas. So if I'm looking at this and I see that there could be like maybe a circle here or something for a light reference, you can work that in really slowly. I make quite dark bubbles because I kind of like the depth of them, but people can go in and make like really light, beautiful pieces. That's totally great. That's great. Yeah, so you can kind of see where it's starting to go. And then I'm going to take a little bit of a leap here and push this line a little further up with this darker color. And you see that just kind of jumped in there, so. And you can see this line is kind of implying a little more of that roundness of that bubble. I'm gonna do this one. Give that deeper kind of color. Not all your bubbles, by the way, have to have the same colors in them. You don't have to add reds to them if there's too much color already in it. See, I really like how that did that, and I'm going to leave that as it is because I don't want to irritate it. Right? So you can see that you can kind of pick and choose and get an eye for where those colors are going. And I mean, I can zone out in this because I'll just sit there and kind of put the puzzle pieces together as best I can. Lots of times it won't work, and that's totally okay. For me, I have so many pieces of watercolor paper that I've used, and it just looks like nothing because I've just kind of been messing around with it. And that's why I have both types of quality papers, is because I don't want to spend a whole ton of money trying to make something really cool when I have no idea what I'm doing with it yet. And if you spend all that expensive paper and you're still kind of just practicing something, you get kind of anxiety from kind of having, or pressure having to create something that looks decent, and that's not what learning really is, right? You want to be confident that you're allowed to mess up. Yeah. So I'm liking these bubbles so far. I'm going to go ahead and sort of work in a little lighter colors around the edges, make it look a little less straight lined, kind of like that. And I'm going to go back to that blue. If you remember this really light blue that we've got going on. But I'm going to be really careful, like I said, about the colors that I'm going to, because for me, I'm going to erase some of those lines when I get a chance. Actually, I might actually erase them now while I have it in my mind. So, like I said, well, that happened. All right. So like I said, I'm going to just erase certain parts of it. This is also why I should have waited for it to dry. That's okay. So I'm going to work through that. I'm going to leave some pieces out. Most of the time, the pieces that I leave out are the spots where the lighter areas are. And I blow that off so I don't have to rub it into my painting. And again, they don't have to be huge or super large pieces. I'm kind of just doing what feels right. I've got a dog in here, I'm sorry. But yeah, so I'm going to work with that. I'm going to get rid of some of those lines where I can. And then I'm going to highlight those with a dark color again in certain areas. But not all of them. I'm just going to work in certain spots. So you can go in with a lighter blue or a darker blue. Kind of play around with how it looks. But this is, if you're going to outline them, this is where you kind of want a thinner brush. Because you can sit there, and then if you want to do like a really straight line, you can put in your brush and your water in that, and then you can twist the brush and then pull back, and that'll give you a straighter, that'll give you a straighter line when you're kind of painting. A little more control. So, that might be too much. Okay. I'm gonna work in here. Full disclosure, this might not work as well as I hope it will, but that's fine. But you can see that straighter line I've got as I'm kind of pulling that in. And again, these aren't perfectly circle bubbles, so I'm okay with it. And then what I can do is kind of just pull this into here, because all these other layers are going to sit on top. And then it's going to pull the rest of the bubble into my image. If you don't want to do that, you can even completely erase the circle and just have a smaller bubble. That works too. And I mean, even if you're painting now and you're just kind of finding new ideas and ways to work around things, you can even comment and let us know if you found an idea that's actually helpful for yourself. Right, so this is what happens here too when you kind of accidentally rub it. I'm going to try and push it back into the bubble this way though. Which is fine. We're not doing anything totally perfect today. We're practicing, enjoying our rainy Sunday. But you can see why watercolor isn't so forgiving, because all this stuff in this area is just pulling out and then turning into something. But, I mean, you can get creative and make it, you know, some sort of fog or whichever. If you want to add like little spots around certain areas, you can do that. This will be a little bit darker probably because there's a bubble behind there. You don't have to make complete lines either. You can kind of just poke it in there. I kind of like how that looks. I'm going to kind of leave that there. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of just create a little bit of a curved line inside my painting. And give it the idea that it's got some sort of structure. Again, this is where you can start kind of pulling in more colors into the sides, giving it a little more connection to the edges. Just be really careful about how much you use, because it can kind of just go wrong, which is fine. Again, it's practice. I'm not going to do it everywhere again. I'm just going to start pulling in at certain spots and giving it that kind of freedom to be what it wants to be. So yeah, you can see how that's starting to look a little more put together. Who knew it'd take over an hour to make bubbles? So yeah. And do that, kind of give it a little bit of a reflection. Mush it around a bit so it's not totally looking like it's entirely deliberate. And again, these are just the bubbles that I like to paint. You can make rainbow bubbles, you can make simply monochromatic bubbles, and if for those of you who don't know that, monochromatic means just one color. If you're feeling like there's a little too much white in the center there, you can always kind of just add a few spots. Again, like I said, I like kind of dabbing it because it gives you little spot things everywhere. You can kind of push those around and dictate what happens. Just be really careful about how much you kind of mess with it with your fingers and stuff. Because at some point, especially if it's less quality paper, it's going to get weaker and it's going to get like pilly. And you'll see little pieces of the paper starting to come off. So you just want to make sure you're not over manipulating your paints and your paper. And you can see when I'm doing this, I'm kind of dabbing it around rather than making super deliberate lines. And again, that's just because this is something that doesn't really have a lot of, it shouldn't have too much control when you're doing the bubbles really. And get some purple in there again, so we bring it up the side. And I kind of like how it is. I kind of like that it's not too light and it's not super light bubbles because, I don't like super light. But I can kind of play around with it now and mess around. If you get really invested in doing your bubbles, you can change colors for how you're going around the bubble. I'm going to stick with my dark colors and my light blues because things like here, because I haven't used a dark color yet, I've just used that lighter blue. It'll kind of give me a little more of an ability to kind of mess around with it. And you can notice I'm not really going on top of the other blue color. I'm kind of going beside it. and then just little bits on top. If you do have lots of water running around there, it's gonna bleed into the bubbles, so just just like that. Just be aware of that. But you can see as we're building the dark colors, it's creating a little more of that roundness. And again, there's certain spots where you'll make a little bit darker. Certain spots you'll keep lighter. If you're not comfortable making your bubbles these dark because it can go wrong pretty quickly, that's okay. But I'm going to move along with it because I kind of like how it's turning out. But you see this spot here, I'm going to just bring it a little closer. And this is kind of something that I really want to show you with negative spaces. And that's this lovely color in that spot there is what you want to see when you're looking for the brightest light sources. So that's why we keep this spot open and sometimes in here, because then that way, instead of having to worry too much about where those spots are and having to paint it back in or trying to with the white paint, you're not going to have that much of an issue. So yeah, I'm going to work with that. And that's why too, you can use a lot darker colors to deliberately create those spots where you see that light. Like I said, if it's dry and you've got the white paint too, you can give it a shot, see what happens. Unless it's very opaque or you're using some form of gouache in a way, it's not going to show very much. Unless you're using lots of layers. I think I'll show you here. So this is me putting water into the white paint. And you'll notice if I go on top of this, it doesn't really do a whole lot. Like, it gives you a little bit of an ability to kind of lighten some spots and dictate where you want those parts to be. But you can see it really doesn't put a whole ton in there unless you're using lots of paint. I do like using the white though, because it does give a very subtle kind of effect on the entire bubble. So I'm just going to move it around. It kind of also kind of dulls the sharp edges that you've got in your bubbles sometimes. So if you like it a little less, like there's these little edges everywhere, you can kind of move that out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker here because we've got less than 20 minutes to kind of get through it. So I'm going to just add a little bit of that white. It's very, very light and very hard to kind of see what it's doing. It's not doing a whole ton, like I said, but it does have potential to kind of help you figure out where you want those colors to kind of sit and how light you want them to be. My dog, I promised him a walk, so he's getting mad at me. So yeah, so you can see what's happening around there. And like we didn't do quite yet with the rest of the bubbles, I'm going to go ahead and start kind of creating that outer line. I'm going to use this blue, pull it and twist, and then kind of just work around it. They are smaller, so I'm giving it a little more leeway in how it's coming together, and that kind of helps sometimes. Like if you look at this one happening here, it's actually working for it because it's giving itself a little space and spots, and it's really kind of going on top of all the rest of that color. So it gives it that impression that there's multi-levels or that soapy kind of look to it. I'm going to go ahead with this darker color a little bit. Pull it around some areas. Like I said, I'm not worrying too much about being perfectly on that line. What I'm trying to get is the illusion that there's kind of that layer. So we can kind of see that. kind of mess around with it a little bit. The only thing I don't like about this one is that there's not much of a light source. Now, if I was to do it again, I'd go back and I'd kind of just make it a little bit lighter in the top spot. But that's okay. So I'm going to add a little bit to kind of even that out a tiny bit. With this one, I have a little more freedom because it's kind of a bit more dry. As I can start adding again more of a dimension to it. Like I said before, I like dark bubbles. I don't know what it is, but they're cool. But yeah, so I'm going to work in some more of this color over top. And right around here, I'm going to lift off from where that line is on the outer bit. So I'm really liking this edge here and pull it around that. So again, it gives that illusion like there's a second sort of layer there. And I'm going to leave that really nice kind of light spot. Ooh, throwing things. I have a problem with throwing my utensils. Alright, so yeah. I'm really liking how those are turning out. Like I said, you don't have to make them this dark. And just because I'm on the screen and I'm trying to make it visible, you don't have to also add too much color here. But you can, like you can have so much fun with this and kind of play with what you like best. For me, it's, again, just all the color getting pushed in there. If you want to make it super realistic, you probably want to use a little less color. But you can see I'm kind of running into another light spot, which is really great. I'm going to just make it a little smaller and kind of work around it because I don't want to lose that too much. Right? And then if you're feeling like you want to kind of make other things around it look a little more like they're moving, I can even, let me clean up this green a little bit. You can even create a background before you do this, and you can kind of work with it. So if I'm thinking of this as sort of like an oily bubble, I can kind of go around it and create a little bit of a green smog or something. Right? And that's using lots of water and just kind of pushing it around. Again, the other thing is this is a very beginner class. We're not going to do anything that's going to just be super confusing and super, like, too many steps. And so you can see just adding little things like that, even though it doesn't have to be green, and kind of give you like that air that they're floating a little bit. And again, you can see it's practice, so I got lines everywhere. And again, if you want to keep adding to your background, it's all about layers. So it gets darker the more layers you put on it, and there's no end to what you can do with that. If you think about it, even in sketching, there's layers and everything. Yeah, you can see, make it look kind of boggy, or more like it's kind of swampy bubbles. Use a bit of a darker green to get that kind of balance. And you can see that I'm just pushing it around really easily, so there's nothing you want to do that's just, again, straight lines or anything. We're working with the ability to kind of play around with it. You can see, again, I'm not putting the dark color every single spot, but I am choosing to kind of push it out a little bit and let it do its thing. And it's funny because you can go forever for this, and then all of a sudden it looks like something, and it's just so strange. We have about 10 minutes left, so if you do have any questions or comments, just let me know. And I can answer them before we kind of get pushed out of the class here. But you can see now that it's starting to look like these bubbles, which the darker bubbles sort of make sense now, I assume. They're just kind of floating in their own kind of space. And you can end up getting really detailed here. Just so you know, if it's still wet, watercolors dry about 30% lighter than they are when they put on. So that's why if you're looking at something and it seems really light and then it's dry and you can almost barely see it, that's because it takes away a lot of the pigment sometimes. It gets sucked into the paper. And so you just add another layer and you can get back to the color you were looking for. It's almost like you're working larger to smaller in pretty much everything. And then if other spots are dry, again, you can add little spots in places and mush it around until you kind of like how it looks. Again, we can use yellows and reds in this. I'd kind of stick away from the blues when you're doing a background with this, because what it's going to do is it's going to just push away all that color you've put into your bubbles. So for me, I kind of like this swampy look. And I'm going to go ahead, because we've got, again, those bubbles sitting there, and put yet another layer of a bit darker around here. And this is again why we use lots of layers and lots of subjects in your painting too, or even whole new paintings, so that you can kind of move around and not wait too long. I'm impatient. I'm a very impatient person when it comes to painting. Yes, I see that. Thank you. I'm gonna be out in a bit. But yeah, so kind of work with those sorts of things and get your painting into a space that you kind of like. And I know it's only an hour, so we're not going to get into too much more, but you see how this is starting to turn it into its own sort of thing. And like I said, if you have things you want to add to it, you can even use white pens if you want to make a multimedia painting. But I'm going to just leave it like this. I'm going to work with it like that. Right. And again, like I'm poking at it, and you can see it's doing different things. You can do it for a little bit, and you can even kind of take it away if you don't like what's happening. And then now I'm kind of moving the circle back on itself. I'm pushing this into the center, but as it's getting lighter, because I'm adding more water, and that's how you're kind of getting the difference between here and in here. And then that negative space, like we talked about, you can move around spots with that layer and recreate, circles and blobs and things that where you would expect light sources to be, right? And you just got to be really gentle about it. I don't know why he wants to go outside right now, but, I apologize for the barking of my little buddy over there. Yeah, I can't leave that like that. So, with watercolor, I know it's intimidating to start. It's intimidating to kind of build layers upon layers. And get things the way that you want them to be, especially when it's something as, different as things like bubbles. And like I said, we're doing bubbles, and then I kind of didn't really say much about you know, the sorts of bubbles we're going to make. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. And you can play around with it, see how far you get with what you want to do. I said I wasn't going to use a lot of black, so I'm going to just push that along there. See how it just kind of moved like that? It's kind of the best thing. So you can see I used very little black there, but it did a lot. And that's why I don't use a lot of black, because it pushes its way and gives its own kind of presence, if you will. So black is a very specific part that I'll put in, because I do know it makes a lot of impact. Right? So as you can see, I did kind of dark gaseous bubbles. If you have if you have any questions about doing, you know, lighter bubbles or things that have a little more reflection to them, just let me know. But again, you're more than welcome to ask me about this session and get some more insights on doing these sorts of things, and play with the lightnesses and the darks. I mean, all you're going to do is discover, right? And that's the best thing you can do for yourself when you're painting or learning to do something. And I hope that people that are coming to these are starting to feel a little less apprehensive about learning painting and watercolor especially, because it's all about practice. If you aren't doing as well as you thought you would the first round, keep going, because it's going to get better, I promise you. It just takes practice, just like anything else. Yeah. Alright, so it's 4:58. I'm going to just kind of keep painting a little bit and keep looking at the screen. And again, if there's any comments, I will answer them to my best ability. And I'm just going to keep making my little gas bubbles. And flesh out this swamp. And this exercise is more to kind of teach you gentleness and how far you can go with a layer before it starts getting really dark, right? So, and remember, negative spaces are kind of helpful. So if you were to, you know, create something, again, like another bubble, and you wanted there to be certain light sources like that, and pull it down and make it follow down this way, you want to make sure that you're not putting anything else in that area, right? So, and again, you can see how much water is there, how quickly I'm kind of putting stuff into it, which is fine. You can really start fleshing out those areas that you're using the negative space to create, making the implication that something's there. Right? And it's just that simple, even if you're doing quick bubbles, to create something like that and be perfectly happy with what that is. I would love to see your 5 floaty bubbles. So please, if you do, definitely send me pictures of what you got. And I think we're going to sign off now. But yeah, let me know what you got. Let me see if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you want to let me know if there's anything that you'd be interested in seeing with watercolor, and we can kind of work from there. I will be doing more intermediate classes as time goes by, and then I will be having a few more opportunities that I'll let you guys know about as we go. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for coming and sharing this hour with me. Take my dog.